So I'm going to interrupt our regularly scheduled programming. I'd like to introduce Bill Stilson. He ran GenghisCon for how many years?
Ran it for eight, and I've been a part of it since 93. No, yeah, 93. So doing security on up.
Under Bill's stewardship, we've had a long legacy from 1979 to 2024. So I thought it would only be fitting that the president of the Denver Gamers Association present this to Luke. As one of our Iron GMs, he's put 16 hours in the chair.
Multiple times, right?
Yes.
Multiple times.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll wear it with pride. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for doing that. Thanks, Bill, for coming.
Get a long speech. It all started back when I was just a child. All right.
I keep knocking this thing. All right. Oh, now I'm all crazy. All right. Good evening, everyone. Happy Saturday night. Thank you for joining me here for a little seminar, I guess, on growing up Gygax. It's a question I got asked a lot after my father passed away in March of 2008. People would say, "What was it like growing up in your house?" And I was like, "Felt pretty normal." That's what, how does it feel growing up in your house? It's kind of your own perception. So I wasn't sure how to answer that at first, but I got asked it a number of times, and so I came up. I kind of figured out what they're asking me is, how was it different than what one might expect growing up in most households in the U.S. in the 70s, right, and 80s? Because I was born in 1970, which is an incredibly long time ago for some of us and not so long ago for others. But somewhere along the line, after me saying, I don't remember a time where I haven't played Dungeons & Dragons, literally my earliest memories are being around the table, shaking dice and gaming. Somebody said I was D&D's patient zero. So I wear that title with pride. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then I think I have an agenda in here. Yeah, so I'll talk about who I am a little bit, what I think makes D&D special, who my dad was, a little bit about my family in the 70s, a couple of what I think are impacts of role-playing games, and what's the verdict? Was my upbringing radically different than most of you in this room? And then we're going to go and have a little discussion with James. He's going to have a few questions for me, and we'll open up the last few minutes. If you have a question, I'm happy to answer that too. Very informal. It's be relaxed and have a nice conversation. If you have something you want me to clarify, just raise your hand or something. We can address it right then. All right. So who am I? I am a retired Army officer. I have taken up writing role-playing games full-time now, as well as some other things like making cool shoes like this and dice and other things. Ooh, yeah. If you haven't seen those, gaxworks.com. You can go there and to the shop and order a pair for yourself. They take about 21 to 25 days to get there, so don't start calling me in like a week if they aren't there. They ship from China. I'm a husband and father of three little girls who are not so little anymore, or getting bigger, 16, 13, and 10, I can't believe it. Unfortunately, none of them were able to make it this year. Last year, my daughter Miriam, my eldest, was with me and helped me run a booth, which was great. What a wonderful experience. And I'm a convention organizer. And in fact, next month I have two conventions coming up. Founders and Legends, which is a one-of-a-kind 50th anniversary special. Donnie will be there, along with Andrea as well. And that's a smaller convention, and kind of a throwback to the early Gary Cons, probably 400 people there, but we'll still have like 25 or 30 guests, anywhere from Mike Merles and Todd Stashwick to guys like James Ward and Ed Greenwood. So a mix of old and new. And then the weekend after that, I have GaryCon, and that I've had for 16 years, the memorial convention in honor of my dad. And I really just started as a way to, it was after his funeral, we gathered so many people wanted to come to Lake Geneva. We gathered and invited anyone who wanted to come, play games, watch the D&D cartoon, ate some food, drank beer, and shared stories about my dad. And it was such a good time, I decided I would throw a little party every year, and it just grew from there into a business that's now, gosh, we sold out at like 3,250 people or something this year, which is the most we can fit into any building in Lake Geneva, which is a town of 7,000 people. That's it. It's tiny. So unless I want to move, which I really don't tell the hotel, but I really don't want to move. So yeah, we'll probably stay in Lake Geneva. And why Lake Geneva? What's cool about Lake Geneva is it's where it was written, it's where TSR was published. It's kind of like the Mecca, the birthplace of Dungeons and Dragons, right? So I feel that it's a sacred place that we should keep this salute to my dad and his works, but it also encompasses, over time, I've encompassed all of the folks who were there in the beginning, and I welcome, gosh, we have a like in memoriam section, a wall of remembrance, and we'll put up names of people who are gone, including my dad and Dave Arneson and others. And we also welcome attendees who've lost someone close to them to put up a picture, to make a notation or whatever for the person who's missing at their table. So it really is a thank you to all of those folks who are living today, who made our community what it is, and a place for all of us to remember those who are important to us around the table, because one thing I've noticed, and I think all of us know this, the bonds you have, the friendships you form around the gaming table are very strong. Sometimes, I've heard people say this about GenghisCon, and I think it applies kind of in general. They say GenghisCon is like a family reunion, but it's with the family you chose, your gamer family. And that's who we have around our table, is our gamer family, right? So that's pretty important thing. And I think that's one of the aspects of role-playing games that is more impactful than I think my dad even realized. It's a little foreshadowing there. All right, so what makes D&D special? I kind of touched upon it already, right? What we may forget, because so much time has passed, 50 years, since role-playing games were invented, is that it's revolutionary. This was a wild concept. This hadn't been done before. There's no board. What do you mean there's no board? How do I play this? I can do anything I want. What are you talking about? That's crazy sauce, right? So there's no board, there's no map. You're only bound by your imagination. And that's a concept that's hard to get if you've never been introduced to it before. If you think about Monopoly, you go around the board in a prescribed one-way manner, right? If you suddenly say, well, I want to go kitty corner, I want to take a left and go off the board, or I want to make up a new place, you can't do that. People are just going to throw up their hands in frustration. Again, with my Monopoly as an example, do people still play Monopoly? Who's played Monopoly? All right, just about everybody? Okay. Yeah, it's a horrible game. Yeah, it's a horrible game. And it's long and frustrating, and oh my gosh. I haven't played it in many, many years. But it's cooperative. So in Monopoly, you're basically cutting each other's throat, right? I'm going to crush you, just like a war game or something like that. So there's one winner, everybody else loses. In Dungeons and Dragons, if you're doing it right, in my estimation, you rise or fall together. You're pulling together. Each person at the table brings an element, a component, a specialty that's going to help the group, right? That's why you got these classes, and why there's talk about what's a balanced party, right? That goes together. And it changes the whole dynamic. I'm not conniving in the back of my mind of how I'm going to set someone up for failure. I'm figuring out how I can boost that person, and we can overcome the obstacle that's in front of us, whatever that may be, right? So that's where a lot of our shared hardships and our bonds come from. The idea of progressive advancement. That doesn't sound very revolutionary now, right? We all play games where you level up. People talk about leveling up for their birthday now and birthday cards. What? That's crazy. That's their cultural appropriation of our gamer stuff. But yeah, it just shows how pervasive it is throughout our world at this point. But the idea that you would get better over time in the same game was new. If you were playing Monopoly, let's say I won the game of Monopoly and I was the shoe. Well, the next time you break out Monopoly and play it, and I pick up the shoe, I don't get a +1 on my die rolls, do I? No. There's just the start, just the beginning, and you do over. That's it. And kind of to that point, D&D is a serial play. You're not just doing the same scenario over and over again. It's like a sitcom or a series or a drama. There's no real set end state other than the one that your DM or GM prescribes, right? They're going to decide when it ends. But that could just be the end of that chapter, and then you go on to do the next thing, right? So again, Monopoly, you pick it up, you finish the game, you put it away, you get it out again, same setup, same beginning, no difference, nothing changes. So those are all revolutionary ideas that I think we take for granted now, and it's made huge impacts in the kinds of games we play in our entertainment. So D&D and RPGs are entrenched in our communities, in our culture, I should say. Movies, video games, books. Harry Potter, right? Lord of the Rings. Now, Lord of the Rings existed before D&D, right? But that certainly, I think, D&D helped set the stage for people to enjoy Lord of the Rings. Again, Game of Thrones. George R.R. Martin's a D&D player, so he's probably had some inspiration there. Stranger Things, the Duffer Brothers are gamers, and very clearly you can see that in Stranger Things. Essentially, those boys are understanding the world of these oddities in their world through the lens of Dungeons and Dragons, because that's how they know the fantastic, right? So I think that's pretty cool, and a cool way to switch it around. Dresden, I think the Dresden Files, anyone read Jim Butcher's Dresden Files? I like that one. All right, not a lot of people. All right, it's basically like White Wolf Mage, I think, and Werewolf and Vampire. He must have been playing a campaign like that and started writing about it. And nowadays, celebrities are playing D&D, right? So it just goes to show you all sorts of people play D&D. Why does that matter? Why would I even mention that? I think it's because in the past, it was really frowned upon to be playing Dungeons and Dragons. For those who remember when being called a nerd was a bad thing. Okay, a lot of us will. So the younger folk maybe don't remember. Really? They still use nerd as a pejorative term?
We've reclaimed it.
Oh, okay.
In childhood it was.
Okay. Okay. All right, well, it seems like being a nerd is kind of cool now. All right, so who was my dad? Who's this guy who came up with this revolutionary idea? He was the only child of his mom and dad. He had a half brother and sister who he didn't get along with very well. But he was a voracious reader who loved science fiction and fantasy. His mom would read folklore and myths to him, and his dad would tell him fantastic bedtime stories that he would make up with wizards with rings of invisibility and things like that. That really fired up his imagination, and he loved it. He loved playing games. He'd play anything from pinochle to shogi to go to chess to war games. And he was a huge war gamer in the 60s. That was how he was known in the community. He was a rebel and a black sheep. He did not graduate high school. He dropped out because he was bored. He would skip school, and he caused his mom much consternation. But he was a game designer, so he was not unintelligent, but he was very headstrong and independent, is probably the polite ways to put that. And he had a passion for words. If you read the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons rules books, you'll see a lot of what some people refer to as high Gygaxian. He loved words. He thought that words had meaning, and variations of similar words carried a connotation that was important. And by using those more exact terms, you could better convey the message to the reader. And he thought it was good for people to know more language, and it was helpful. He was a family man. I'm the youngest of 5. And he's a risk-taking visionary. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. So my family in the 70s, my dad was an insurance underwriter for Fireman's Fund in Chicago, and he commuted to Lake Geneva on a train that existed at that time, doesn't anymore. And he worked that job, and like I said before, I mentioned he was a little bit independent and wouldn't always follow the rules. So he would invite his friends in Chicago to come play war games with him, board games and things like that while he was working. Well, his office mate, coworker, was named Bruno, and he didn't care for that. And he told my dad, hey, cut it out, you can't do that. He's like, hey, look, you aren't my boss. Why don't you mind your own business? I'll do my work. Thank you very much. Well, they were up for a promotion at the same time, and you can guess who got the promotion. It was not my dad. And the first thing that Bruno did in October of 1970 was fire my dad from his job right when my mom was 8 months pregnant with me. So here is my dad with 4 kids, with no income, and it was a very modest job even at that time, and the 5th one on the way. So he talked to my mom. He said, essentially, we can move to another area, probably Boston, where I could work and find a job, or I can try writing. I want to write. And he was an amateur game designer. He'd written all sorts of rules variants and a few things like Alexander the Great and some other board games for Avalon Hill and Guide on Games. But gaming was very, very niche. It was not a big moneymaker. I don't know, 100,000 people, 200, 300,000 people maybe played, I'm guessing, worldwide. And that wasn't happening. So my mom supported and said, hey, you got a little bit of unemployment, let's go ahead and give it a shot. He did, that ran out, and he ended up finding a way to become a cobbler. So he was a shoe repairman in the early 70s, repairing shoes and making very ugly sandals for the monks who were in Lake Geneva at that time. And there's one surviving sandal that we auction at GenghisCon in the charity auction every year, the sandal of Gygax, and it's a great story. Because somebody found it in the back of their closet, one of his old friends found it in the back of his closet, and he's like, oh, I bet somebody will pay for this. It's the last piece of work that my dad had. And so there's this old beaten up, cruddy shoe there. And so we put it up in the auction, and Tom DeSanto, who's a movie producer, bought it for $1,000. And he brought it back the next year and said, sell it again. So it got sold, somebody else bought it for $1,000, and then they polished the shoe and put it in a little shoe form, and then it got in a box, and then kept progressing. Somebody made plaques they put in on the box of who was the guardian of the sandal. And Chris Pronosky from Titmouse Studios got it during the pandemic. And he kept it for like 3 years. And every year he'd give $1,000 to the charity. $1,000, right? Just so it would keep going. And he took it around the world with him, and he has pictures with like Neil deGrasse Tyson and all these various people, and people holding up the sandal of Gygax and all that stuff. And it's now in a coffer, wrapped in fur, wrapped in chainmail, in a box, in a shoe form with books of pictures in there. And the current holder is Joe Manganello, who bought it last year for $5,000 to be the guardian, and it sits in a little shrine in his gaming space. So that's just fun. So anyway, he was a cobbler. I'm really gonna fight. 5 kids. We were poor. We were so poor, I wore hand-me-down clothes like winter boots from my older sisters and this sort of thing. So we were super poor. I remember putting a bread bag over my foot because I had holes in the boots. So we were super poor. There was no food other than meals. My dad, like I said, he was active in wargaming circles, tons of like newsletters and stuff, but really no money. My mom stood by him during this time. My dad was home all the time. He'd work all day and then stay up till the wee hours of the morning, writing to people and doing moves through play-by-mail games, etc. So that was kind of the scene when in 1972 at GenCon, which is a convention he started in Lake Geneva as well, so it's the Geneva Convention. So it started in 1968 as a wargaming convention, right? So it was International Federation of Wargamers in Lake Geneva. They called it the Geneva Convention or GenCon. And he met a guy named Dave Arneson, and they had done a few things. And Dave told my dad, hey, I have this idea, basically an offshoot of another game that somebody had showed me, and you play yourself in a fantasy world, and you go underground, and you explore. And my dad thought, wow, that's really cool. He's like, I think with the chainmail supplement and some extra rules, sure enough, he spent some months typing on his old typewriter, right? And came up with what were eventually become those 3 little booklets that have changed the world. And he was like, this is really cool. This is gonna be amazing. Could sell 10,000 copies. So he went to Avalon Hill, and he said, check it out. And they said, no, this is ridiculous. This is a kid's game. this is garbage. No one's gonna, we can't, we're serious war gamers here, Gary. No. And so he shrugged and he went to his other friend at Guidon Games, which was basically run out of a garage in Baltimore. And Don Lowry said, hey, Gary, I love you, but I can't take this risk. It could end me, and I just can't, I'm just not sure about this. So my dad, no money, eventually we went on food stamps, so we weren't starving as much, so we had food stamps. My mom would garden. She'd go out to we didn't have a car either, so my cousin would give her a ride out to a patch of his land where she'd garden and canned vegetables for us, and she baked bread and all that, so we would be able to eat. So this is a situation. There's no way my dad could do anything. But his best friend from, I don't know, when they were elementary school, a guy named Don Kay, had played the game, liked hanging out with my dad, and he said, Gary, I got you. And he took out a loan against a life insurance policy, and he came up, I believe it was with $2,000. And that's what they used to kickstart Tactical Studies rules. And if you notice on the front of those old books, it has a G and a K intertwined. That's for Gygax and Kay, and they were in business together. Unfortunately, so the game was published in that old wood grain box set with a label that you lick and stick on there, right? Those were assembled in the basement by my brothers and sisters. So I was too young to do that. I was like 3. But they hated it, and they would complain. But they put those together. My sisters would do stuff like put a dead spider in there or something like that and say, nerd, you're going to have a dead spider, right? Because they hated to put to work. You know how it is doing chores for your parents. It's true. Well, they were 14, 15, 16. They were young too. It began to take off slowly. By 1976, they were doing additional printings. Unfortunately, Don Kay passed away at that time, and his wife wanted to cash out his stock, right? So my dad had to take in some other investors, and that's a story for another time, but that's the foreshadowing. So my dad was not in business with his best friend anymore and did not own 51% of the company. Bad things in that combination. So that was kind of the circumstance. That's why I said he was a real risk taker to put it all on the line to do this, and eventually he did very well, right? And the company grew. So what do RPGs do for us? I think they encourage reading and basic math skills, enhance our social skills, persuasive speech, problem solving, etc. A bunch of skills that you get by playing a game. So it's almost like you're learning without work. You know what I mean? Like, it's a sneaky way of teaching people how to be better at stuff, right? It gives you space to explore various personality traits and test out ways to deal with other people and what may work and what doesn't. Develop a sense of team, and we talked about the building bonds through shared hardship. It's imaginary, but tell me what, when you get together with a group and you remember an adventure you went on, what do you say? You don't say, do you remember when you were playing Bafo the Fighter and you hit the thing and you rolled a 20 and you critted and then you killed the dragon? No. Say, do you remember when you killed the dragon and you critted with a 20? Like I threw that haste spell on you and you got 3 attacks and you took it up. You make it you. Well, it's a pretend character, right? But we internalize that. So it's real in our minds, and that's how these shared hardships happen. It builds creativity. I can't tell you how many people have talked about how it showed them and that they wanted to be creators, that they wanted to write and create stories. And of course, when you're doing it for hundreds of hours a week for fun, you're going to learn some of those storytelling and techniques and be better. So by the time you get to college and you take creative writing or whatever it is, or game design, you're going to have a lot of, leg up on everybody else. There's therapeutic effects, and of course, people love stories. We've always told stories. D&D is a way of storytelling. Do I think it's all about creating necessarily a shared story? Yeah, I think that's a simple way of explaining it, but I would say your referee, your GM, your DM provides an outline for you guys to kind of begin with, and the players fill it in most of the time. Sometimes they'll go way outside the lines though, so maybe then you're creating a story together, I don't know. But I think that's what the impact of RPGs has been on us. So what was my life growing up like? from the age of 4 years old, I was rolling dice at table, mostly with adults. So I think I learned, I related to adults a little bit better. I'm certainly good at adding up dice rolls. I can look at a bunch of dice and I can tell you what the score is really fast. I heard a lot of, my vocabulary was always in the 99th percentile all the way through school, simply because I talked to my dad, if you wanted to understand him. I got to participate in the creative process. I didn't even realize I was maybe in a creative process, but I was talking to my dad about it, and we would play test things, and I would give him feedback, right? So it was that loop. So in that sense, I think I was exposed at a much earlier time to interacting with adults who were all creatives in the creative process and how to do that. But by and large, it wasn't that much different than the rest of the gaming community. Because I bet everybody, well, has anyone here ever created their own magic item or spell? Right? Okay, me too. Just when I got to create it, my dad published it and put it out there for the world, right? So not that much different, right? When I was a kid and I was playing games and it was getting to be 9 o'clock at night, I still had to go to bed. My mom would crack the whip. Yeah, Mom, we're in the middle of a combat. To bed. So I think although I had some really unique and cool aspects to growing up, it wasn't that radically different. I think that we, as a gaming community, share a lot in common. And honestly, I feel pretty close to most gamers. I feel like I can relate to tabletop gamers. I can sit down and within 5 or 10 minutes, be decent acquaintances, if nothing else, and we have things to talk about. And I think a lot of that is just we like some of the same things and we can share it, and a lot of commonalities that we have. And I think it's great because I bet not everybody here feels the same on politics or religion or pick any other divisive issue you want to pick. But we can all sit at a table and have a good time, right? We get to know each other, and I think that's good for the world. So more of that is needed.